President Biden and former President Trump's first face-to-face showdown in 4 years. It'll be the first of 2 scheduled presidential debates ahead of November's election, and it's historic for several reasons. It's the first time a sitting president will debate a former one. The candidates are 2 of the oldest people ever to run for president, and one of them is now a convicted felon. Senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott has this story.
It's the biggest test yet of the 2024 campaign. President Biden and Donald Trump set to come face to face for the first time in 4 years. In the final hours, President Biden hunkered down at Camp David. He spent nearly a week there, holding mock debates with senior advisors. His rival not doing any of that.
I think I've been preparing for it for my whole life, if you want to know the truth. I'm not sure you can lock yourself into a room for 2 weeks or 1 week or 2 days and really learn what you have to know.
Trump is preparing more than he's letting on, holding more than a dozen policy sessions with advisors and allies. Both sides already trying to set the tone as Biden prepares to cast Trump as a threat to democracy. His campaign rolling out an endorsement from former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who served on the January 6th committee.
There is one man running for re-election, of 2 men running for re-election, that cares about the future of this country and cares about democracy, and that's Joe Biden.
Trump's campaign hosting an event at an Atlanta barbershop.
All right, everybody, you're on with the president.
The former president calling in, suggesting his legal troubles help him appeal to black voters. Comments the Biden campaign call insulting.
I think my representatives will tell you this. The black support has gone through the roof.
Yes, it has.
And I guess they equate it to problems that they've had.
Trump is now the first convicted felon to become a party's presumptive nominee. And in another unprecedented moment, he and Biden are the oldest candidates to ever seek the White House. Tonight, there will be no studio audience. Mics will only be turned on when it's their turn to speak. Both sides hoping that helps avoid this shouting match that happened last cycle.
Why would you answer that question?
The question is,
radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen,
And ABC News senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott joins me now from Atlanta. Rachel, what's the goal tonight for each of these candidates?
Stay on message. That is what we are hearing from both campaigns. That is ultimately the goal here. But of course, you have these 2 different candidates pitching 2 very different visions for the future of the country. So for former President Donald Trump, his campaign wants him to talk about the economy, talk about crime, inflation, also hit President Biden hard on immigration. For President Biden, his campaign is going to want him to zero in on the issue of abortion, but also this comment that the president continues to make that says that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Still, there are going to be challenges here for each of the candidates. And one thing that a lot of voters are going to be paying attention to is how these candidates really come across, Diane, because you mentioned it. These are the 2 oldest candidates to ever even compete to go to the White House. And so a lot of people will be judging every single movement, whether there's a stumble or a misstep there. But also for former President Donald Trump, you saw that last debate. You saw just how much it turned into a shouting match. There's a big question tonight of what version of Donald Trump are we going to get? Are we going to get the former president who's a little bit more disciplined in his message? Or is he going to try and upstage and shout over the former president, for the president of the United States? Obviously, with no studio audience and the microphones only being turned on when they're allowed to speak, that will certainly help in that scenario.
And how much is at stake here, Rachel? Could the debate performance really make a difference in the outcome of this election?
You know, this is going to be a big question coming out of this debate, Diane, because if it feels early, it is because it is. Never before have we had a presidential debate this early in the general election cycle. And so right after the debate, we're going to be looking to see whether or not it really moved the needle. I think it can, certainly for the voters that do not like either candidate. We've talked about these voters, the double haters, for instance, that don't like President Biden, they don't like former President Donald Trump either. Is anything of what these candidates say tonight going to appeal to that group of people, especially those independents in the critical battleground states that could ultimately decide this election, Diane?
All right, senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott in Atlanta. Thanks, Rachel. And President Biden and former President Trump are in a dead heat in the polls going into tonight's debate. ABC News political director Rick Klein has a look at what could move the needle.
Diane, this has been a very tight race from the beginning. The 538 polling average tells a bit of the story. It's basically tied, with 1/10 of a percentage point separating the 2 candidates in the polling average. You see things got a little bit tighter in the last couple of weeks after the Trump conviction, but still basically a tied race with Bobby Kennedy Jr., who's not going to be at the debate tonight, down at 9%. So we did something a little bit different in our poll with Ipsos. The 538 poll with Ipsos asked people not just who you're going to vote for, but who you're considering voting for. So you could actually give more than one answer if you're torn between candidates. And you see kind of a ceiling for the candidates, the main candidates, that's pretty low. 44.8, 44.5. Again, basically a tie in terms of the potential universe of voters that are considering them. That, though, is a striking number. Bobby Kennedy's number is twice what his current poll number is. That means there's a lot of voters who will be watching tonight that might be looking for another option. So if these two guys go after each other, it might be the guy not on stage who benefits in an odd sort of way. And in terms of the issues that candidates are likely to talk about tonight, well, this is what voters say they want to hear about. These are the most important issues in this 538 Ipsos poll. Voters say will influence who they end up supporting in the fall. You see, inflation's the biggie. Half of voters say that's very big. Immigration, second on the list, followed by political extremism, abortion, crime, gun violence, and other issues like climate change. The problem for Joe Biden is that on most of these issues, and the big ones, Donald Trump is favored. A 10-point edge on handling of inflation, 12 points on handling of immigration. It's only when you get to some of these lower-tier issues like abortion and political violence and extremism that you start to see a Biden edge. So that tells you a little bit about what the candidates want to be talking about. And again, advantage Trump if you're thinking about the voters. One thing, though, that might be an advantage for Joe Biden, he is viewed as way less likely to have a bad debate, or way more likely to have a bad debate. The expectations game, which is a big part of how debates are covered and talked about, favors Joe Biden in that more voters than not think he's likely to not be great out there. So it may be that a very good debate or even kind of an average debate ends up being a win for Joe Biden. Diane?
All right, ABC News political director Rick Klein, thank you. And earlier on Good Morning America, ABC News' Mary Bruce and Jonathan Karl gave their analysis of tonight's historic debate. Check it out.
Between our chief Washington correspondent, John Karl, our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce and John. Let's start with the Trump side. What do they hope to accomplish tonight?
Well, look, Donald Trump needs to show that he's not what Joe Biden has portrayed him as, which is a threat to democracy, unhinged, somebody that is bringing chaos back to the White House. And frankly, George, I think that the rules of this debate actually favor Donald Trump. The idea that the mics will be muted means that if he comes out of this and it's a relatively boring debate and Donald Trump hasn't acted in the way that he is fully capable of acting, it'll be a win for him. It'll be seen as normal and relatively steady.
Because Biden has to shake things up, presumably. Is that what's going to happen tonight?
Well, look, the Biden campaign sees this as a real jumpstart moment, a chance for them to break through to a larger audience. And they hope those critical, undecided voters who haven't really engaged in this race yet. That's why they pushed for this early debate. The president's goal here is to hold Donald Trump accountable, to remind voters of the chaos of the Trump presidency. And as John says, he will argue that he is a threat to democracy. The president, I'm told, is also preparing to walk a fine line here. He knows that Trump is going to try and go after him. He has to show he's a steady leader and not get rattled. The muted mics may help with that. But perhaps what most people are going to be watching most closely, Joe Biden has to bring it. He has to show voters concerned about his age that he is up for this, and he has to convince those panicky Democrats that he can win.
Okay, thank you both very much.
Mary Bruce, John Karl, thank you.